How do we accommodate people who see the world differently? That's the challenge of our times. There's a great power in this kind of practice of noticing the world around us and paying heed. What a gift in this time when we've got so many distractions. But what happens when we put all that down and give our attention to the world, whether it's paying attention to birds or plants? We're in dialogue with the world, and the world can speak and we can listen. That communication is very subtle, it's very gentle. It's not an earth-shattering initiation, but it's nonetheless powerful.
Hello, dear community. I am always curious of how this meets you, where you may be, what you might be doing, and what might be running through your mind as you press play here. I am grateful for you and for this space that we share, whether you've been here with us at All That We Are for years, or you're new to this journey, you are so welcome here. My live experience of Reclaim Your Intuition starts next week on the 23rd of July in the full moon glow. If you would like to come on a 6-week exploration with me over the summer and refine your intuitive skills and open up your connection with the unseen worlds, it would be such a joy to share this with you. All the details can be found over on our calendar at allthatweare.org. My guest today and I were sat in the same primary school play today, as my nieces and his children go to the same school. It was very moving and inspiring to witness the kids share a story of a place called Arcadia, where earthlings and other species come together in kindness and collaboration, putting their greed and differences behind them. It's an inspiring story of what could be possible with our future. We speak in this episode of my initiation with the foxglove, which is now something I've been working through for a few weeks. It continues to be a very powerful journey, and I still have tingling in my hands, feet, and lips. It did involve a long trip to A&E as well as medical assistance to then get to the more spiritual shamanic parts of this journey. I share this here in case I make it sound like something you might want to experience, as the plant has supported me in clearing so much energy that I was holding in my heart that wasn't mine or wasn't needed anymore. However, this is a highly toxic plant and one you need to be very careful with. I just touched the stem and leaf, and this happened after asking permission from the plant to bring it into this ceremony. Interestingly, I have been working regularly with a vibrational essence of the plant for the past year and in a deep relationship with it. It's known as the deadly nightshade and is highly toxic to ingest. It can cause death as well as a variety of other serious symptoms. It's used as a medicine for heart failure, and just from touch, it can cause severe reactions. I share this to say, please don't listen to this and then go out and touch the plant or work with the plant. I know you probably won't, but we don't have foxglove shamans here that can support you, and it could be really dangerous. I have been incredibly lucky that although a strong reaction, it has not been more severe physically than this. The foxglove is a plant that needs to be given very high respect and treated with care, admired from afar. It is a guardian of the gateway into the other world and is a really visionary medicine that also clears blockages, especially around the heart, giving us access to a more expanded and non-dual perspective, and to explore and understand our shadows in a new light. However, if this plant calls to you, you can receive this medicine without touching or ingesting this plant. My guest is Dr. Andy Letcher, a senior lecturer at both Schumacher College in Devon, the UK, where he is the program lead for the MA Engaged Ecology, and at the University of Exeter, where he teaches on the PGCert Psychedelics, Mind, Medicine and Culture. He is the author of Shroom, A Cultural History of the Magic Mushroom, and numerous papers on psychedelics, ecology, animism, and paganism. Andy researches the contemporary use of psychedelics with a particular focus on the role psychedelics might play in our cultivating and ecological self. He is currently researching ritual and animist usage of psychedelics by contemporary Druids and the contemporary use of the Fly Agaric mushroom. He has been a guest on the Green Dreamer, Hive, Living Mirrors, and Mushroom Hour podcasts, and appeared at Glastonbury, Shambhala, Green Man, and Medicine festivals. A folk musician, he plays English bagpipes, low whistle, and dark age lyre. You will hear some of Andy's music in this episode. We start with a tune called Lyre, a composition of Andy's played on the English border bagpipes and arranged by his band Telling the Bees. He was thinking about the ring nebula in the constellation Lyra when the tune came to him. At the end, you will hear Andy noodling on the lyre, playing what came through after our conversation came to a close. In this conversation called Mysterious Riddles, we explore the themes of rites of passage, folk music, and animism as we speak to the question, how do we honor diverse ways of life and all that we are? I hope that this conversation opens up something beautiful for you in your relationship to all of life, to our plant world, and with your own heart. Welcome to All That We Are, with me, your host, Amisha Ghadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between activism, the sacred, creativity, and regeneration, the spaces where our inner and outer worlds dance. From healing trauma to nature connection, to new technologies to ancient wisdom, it's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a more beautiful future. Despite the challenges we face as a global community, or the pressures we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to listen, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing and envisioning, we create the futures of our wildest dreams. And we begin to embody all that we are becoming, and all that is possible. Andy, it is an absolute delight to welcome you to All That We Are. Thank you so much for coming and sharing on this podcast. This has been one that I have wanted to do for some time, and I'm really grateful that we are here in your home and the place of your work on the Dartington estate here in Devon.
Well, thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
What comes alive for you when I ask you what are the futures of your wildest dreams?
That's such a great question. I'm constantly struck in my work and just life at how exquisitely beautiful the world is. In our conversation before we started recording, we've been talking about flowers. And, you just look at a flower or the turning of the seasons or whatever. The world is just so beautiful when we notice it. And yet there's so much ugliness and pain and strife in the world. My wildest dream is a world in which we're more aware of that beauty. It's incorporated into everything we do. It's something we give our attention to. In my wildest dreams, a world where there's more care, more kindness. And we're not short on beauty, but we're short on time for beauty or awareness of it. So maybe a simpler world, one with fewer complications.
That phrase, like taking time to smell the roses, it comes to mind. That if we were to simplify things, that we would have more time and space to tend to the simplicity and the love and care and appreciation of every aspect of aliveness.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm as guilty of this as everyone, that I wake up, I have my breakfast, and I plug into the laptop, and the morning goes by, and I've done emailing, and I have to remember, I'm supposed to be the person teaching people about ecological awareness, and maybe I should step away from the computer and go outside and smell a rose. Or in my case, I particularly love giving attention to birds and birdsong and the noises that birds make. But yeah, it's hard, and we've created a world, or we've fallen into a world, nobody's really planned it, where it's really hard to give attention to smelling the roses. But so wonderful when we do, and always worthwhile when we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because email is actually communicating, and it is funny how we've turned communicating into this like isolated task by a computer rather than a kind of, vibrant interpersonal relating moment where we could be outside with the roses or on the phone where both of us are sat with our respective roses whilst talking, but instead somehow it becomes this thing where we're communicating but like not directly.
I'm old enough to remember not having email.
Yeah.
And being there, I was given my first email account when I did a PhD, and nobody sent you any emails because no one had any, there was nothing to say. And it seemed dreadfully exciting, the idea that, wow, I could just contact someone in America or in Australia or India or wherever it is. And now, of course, you slightly dread opening the inbox because there's just a mountain of emails to get through. And this thing, as you say, that should be joyous. It should be about a space of communication opening up between two people, becomes burdensome. And yeah, it's a funny world we've made.
It is. And I guess there's always an invitation to work out what we can reclaim in and amongst that, and something for all of us to tune into. Like, is this how we want to communicate? Is this how we need to? Because we all fall into the traps of it, of like it being normal. Yeah, I'm inviting myself and you and everyone to reconsider how we communicate.
And yet, as you say, we wouldn't be here having this conversation if we hadn't texted one another. And
yeah,
so it's a double-edged thing. It's a beautiful thing.
I could have called you or come and knocked on your door.
Yeah,
written you a letter.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an invitation to be more playful, I suppose, there. Tell us about your relationship with birdsong and how that comes into your life?
I wish I could say there was a kind of defining moment where I suddenly got interested in birdsong. There hasn't been one. It's been way more gradual. But I do remember as a kid growing up in Devon, not far from where we are now, the first time I connected a sound that I was very familiar with a particular bird. And it was after a storm, after a summer storm. And English storms are always over very quickly, disappointingly quickly when you're a child. And it was still raining, the thunder had passed, the storm had passed, and a blackbird started singing, and I saw it singing, and I connected the bird with the sound and went, okay, that's a blackbird song. And the sound that was very, very familiar to me growing up. And my father was a very keen ornithologist, so I've never studied birds or birdsong in any methodical way. Most of what I know I've picked up by osmosis. As we'd drive along, my dad would go, oh look, there's a buzzard, or there's a little egret over there, or whatever it was. So I sort of got it by osmosis. And then in my adult life, I'm a folk musician, and folk music is an oral tradition, or at its best it is an oral tradition, in that you learn not only the repertoire by ear, but the nuance, the subtleties of rhythm and accent and ornamentation you have to get by ear. So I've got a good ear, and gradually I just started paying more and more attention to birdsong. Well, it gives me great pleasure. There's a sort of pleasure in knowing who's around. So just this morning I heard a goldfinch out in the tree outside, and for the past few years we haven't really had goldfinches here, but I heard it and okay, there's a goldfinch. It's not quite an aesthetic pleasure, but there's a pleasure in knowing the world, in knowing who I'm living with, who's around, what they're doing. And then there's a pleasure that comes from a deep embodied knowing. So this happened earlier in the spring, happened several times. I was walking the kids to school, so obviously incredibly distracted with, chatting to the children, trying to get them to school on time. And then suddenly I kind of stopped and went, there was a chiff-chaff. I just heard the first chiff-chaff. So I wasn't consciously listening for it, but some part of me now has internalized birdsong, so that when I hear it, something in me responds. And so the chiff-chaff, it's one of the first harbingers of spring. This tiny little brown bird, nondescript bird, but it flies all the way from Africa to rear its children here. And when it arrives, chiff-chaff, 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 some part of me now goes, the spring is occurring. And then a little bit later, the same thing happened. I heard the first swifts arrive. This sort of joyous, bubbling sound as swifts dance around the sky. And so it connects me deeply to the world and to the turning of the seasons. So I, on some bodily level now, having paid attention to birdsong, I've got these markers of the seasons turning, the arrival of spring or the arrival of autumn. So in the autumn, the robin that we're all, in Britain at least, familiar with, it's our national bird. We voted it as our national bird. It has two songs, and it has a winter song and a summer song, and at the end of the summer it will start its winter song. And it's subtly different, but you hear it and you feel that, summer's over, autumn's on its way, winter's coming. So what it's given me is this really embodied way of being with the world and the turning of the seasons and the life outside the human, to the point where I don't even have to consciously pay attention to it. It just, some part of me is now tuned to the key of birdsong. And it's, brings me a great sense of belonging and peace.
And orients you in like the seasons and where we are. And
and what else is happening in the environment by understanding which birds are present at any one time. You mentioned that you're a folk musician. A dear friend of mine, Gavin Kendrick, who was actually the sound editor of this podcast at the very beginning, he was telling me that you have, really amazing skill in some very rare instruments.
Oh, well, that's kind of him.
And I would love to hear more about that. I've never heard you talk about your music and the instruments that you play and your relationship with them.
So I play a few instruments. So let me tell you the full tale of woe. So I was given piano lessons when I was a kid, and I just hated them. I hated everything about it.
Playing chopsticks and green sleeves didn't do it for you.
Yeah, all of that, and this awful music that is written for children. That is just, you wouldn't want to listen to it, let alone struggle to play it. And as I've said, I've got a really good ear, but I'm dreadful at reading music. I think reading music is a very particular skill. And reading for the piano, got all these fingers and rhythms. It's like deciphering a code. Anyway, I failed dismally at the piano, and I couldn't wait to give it up. But I felt this yearning to play music, this unfulfilled need. And I just left school and I went to stay with a friend of mine, a school friend in the New Forest. He was an amazing rock guitarist, but he also played tin whistle. He sat and played these Irish tunes in the New Forest in the late summer sun, and I was just beguiled. And I thought, well, maybe me with no musical ability could get a tune out of a tin whistle, this most rudimentary of instruments. And I got a tin whistle, and one thing led to another, and I learned some tunes, and I started playing in sessions. So I was eventually living in Oxford. And then I encountered bagpipes. And up to that point, I'd only heard Highland bagpipes, which I think probably most people in the world are now familiar with. But there's all these other bagpipes in the world. You're found all across Europe and in North Africa and even in India, as far as India. And it's like every region has its own bagpipe. And the function of the bagpipe is to get people to dance until they drop. It's got this wild sound to call people to the dance. So I became a piper, and so I play a variety of bagpipes that not many people have heard of, but it's called English border pipes. They're not as loud as Highland bagpipes. They're a bit more flexible, and they're chromatic, and they just have this very, very beautiful sound and quality. There's a wildness to them. Yeah, wildness. What I love about the pipes is that they're so earthy. They're made of wood and leather, they're of the earth. They summon up the earth, and yet they can lift you at their best, lift you to heaven. There's something absolutely heavenly about them. I say that knowing full well that they're the Marmite instrument, and not everybody loves them in the way that I do, but they speak to my soul. And I think the first time I heard someone play a set of Spanish gaita in a session in Oxford, I was just mesmerised. The hairs were up on the back of my neck, and I thought, I have to do that. So I'm a piper. I've played mandolin and been a songwriter. I don't write so many songs these days. And I also play this instrument hanging on the wall here, which is a replica of a Dark Age instrument. It's a lyre. The lyre was the electric guitar of the Dark Ages. Everyone would have played a lyre. And it's just got 6 strings. It's like a harp, but with 6 strings. And there's a puzzle, like why on earth did people just have an instrument with 6 notes? Like, why wouldn't you have more? Because that instrument it's a replica of an instrument that was dug up in Germany, and it's exquisitely made and carved from a piece of wood, and there's no reason at all why it couldn't have been fitted with more strings. So there's a kind of puzzle what music can you make with just 6 notes? It's a very different kind of music to the music that we're habituated to in the West. You know, why do I play the lyre? Or I suppose all my instruments are old instruments, and they evoke a feeling of antiquity, of ancientness, a harking back to a distant time. And I know that is a kind of romantic nostalgia on the one hand, but on another, it's about yearning for ancestral wisdom, ancestral knowledge of a time when we weren't in the mess that we're in now, when people lived more simple lives without email, where they played music together and sang songs together and danced together. So I think that's why, you know, I'm an old soul, I think. And I'm always, you know, harking back to some distant time.
Well, there's something about when I hear a bagpipe, there's like I can feel like it calls like body, mind, soul to attention, and creates that kind of presence. That doesn't always happen with more modern music. It does sometimes, but it doesn't always, because we're so used to having like so many different points of focus. And there's something about that kind of arresting singular focus that just draws you in and really invites your soul to be present. And that is then the space where all of the ancient wisdom and the wisdom of the land and everything starts to speak through us.
I think that's it. And there's something about the drone as well, and having this constant note, except it's not constant, because it's not possible to make a drone physically that doesn't just slightly rise and slightly fall, and it breathes. But there's something about that quality of the drone. It does what the human voice can't do. We can't make a continuous sound. We have to stop and take an in-breath. And so I think there's something about the drone that almost pulls us out of ourselves, because it's doing what we can't physically do, and then carries us into the music, into the melody, the rhythm, and sometimes into trance, into an altered state. And that's its point, is to lead us out of ourselves. So as you can tell, I'm a bit of a bagpipe fanatic, but
I'm wondering, with the music and these kind of aspects, like where did your path into academia come in, and actually to be able to research and teach something that is, you know, so ancient and also of the now?
So I freely admit I have a love-hate relationship with academia. I can struggle with it when I'm in it, and then I hate it when I'm not in it. So, in a way, it was never a choice. It was. I mean, I clearly did okay at school, and my parents just pushed me in that direction, and they weren't really fussy about what I did. But it was just a kind of given that I would study. And the difficulty with that is, you know, you need to be able to choose. I've been lucky enough to dance through various disciplines and study lots of different things. I have 2 PhDs, which is absurd. It's the most ridiculous thing. And it wasn't by choice. You know, I chose to do the first one, and I chose to leave after my first one, which was in ecology. I did it at Oxford, and I loved the subject, but I didn't enjoy the Oxford competitive atmosphere. It didn't suit me at all. And I left to become a activist and tried to stop roads being built, along with many other people, in the 1990s. And I got invited back to do a second PhD. The person who became my second supervisor, Graham Harvey, quite literally rang me up out of the blue and said, "Would you like to do a second PhD in the humanities, in the study of religion? You know, there's 3 years funding." And I had no idea what I was doing with my life, so I said yes. You don't turn these gifts down. I really didn't understand a word of what people were talking about in the humanities until about halfway through my PhD, and then suddenly a light went on, I've always been, I can think of no better word than a seeker. I've always been interested in the big questions, and I've always been dissatisfied with the answers I've got. I'm the annoying one at the back of the class, going, yeah, but. And what academia gives me is a space in which I can address those questions in a way that is incredibly thoughtful. And talk about ancestral wisdom. Well, it's right there. There's however many thousands of years worth of philosophy of people trying to unriddle this mystery of how to be. How can we be all that we are? That's what people have been asking for 4,000 years. And the fact that we still don't have the answer, or an answer that everyone can agree on, doesn't matter. It's the process, it's the inquiry, it's the rumination, the sitting down and chewing it over. That's what people have always done. We've always sat around fires and disagreed with one another and gone, well, you say that, but what about this? And so the other thing I enjoy about it is the testing of my ideas, and I want to be persuaded by things, and I want to be persuaded by my own ideas, and I enjoy the testing of them. One can have all manner of great ideas or revelations or dreams or psychedelic visions, and they can seem very persuasive, but maybe we should ask in the cold light of day, and really? It doesn't mean we have to get rid of everything. I'm not one of those sort of academics who just likes destroying things intellectually because they can. I want it to be generative. I want it to be helpful. But the image I have is of carving a block of wood, and you have your idea, you have your revelation, your moment of gnosis, and it's an uncarved block of wood. And then what intellectual thought can help you do is just refine it, make it more consistent, more beautiful. That's what keeps me in academia, is that possibility.
Do you feel like that has to be done for all kinds of moments of psychedelic vision and such, like you mentioned, or do you feel like there's a specific place for that?
For me, yes. For other people, I'm not imposing this on other people, but for me, I've got that kind of restless quality of, I want to know whether I can trust it, I suppose. This is going to sound a bit glib. It's not meant to be. I have Father Christmas trauma in that my parents did the whole Father Christmas thing beautifully, put out mince pie and a glass of sherry for Father Christmas, and I believed, I was convinced this guy came down the chimney and left presents. When I discovered that it was, sorry, spoiler alert to listeners.
Cover up the ears of your children.
Cover up your ears, yeah, for children listening. When I discovered that it was my parents and Father Christmas as a physical being did not exist, it was agony. It was horrible. And I never want to be in that position again of getting carried away with something that perhaps could be snatched away from me. So I'm kind of happiest dwelling in not knowing. I've got my hunches, of course. I know what I want to be the case. And, you find me at certain times of the night around the fire, and it's definitely the case. But in the clear light of day, I'm not so sure, but I'm happy with that not knowing. I worry about certainty. I worry about people with certainty. I envy people with certainty, but I worry about it, that it seems that a lot of the world's problems are driven by people who are certain that they know, that they have the answer. It can be frustrating to be around someone like me who's forever agnostic and playing devil's advocate, and I get that. And but for me, I need to question things. The flip side of this is that when I came out of my second PhD, which I did on my own spirituality, Druidry, I came out a reluctant atheist. Sort of pretty much all of my certainties were demolished. And it was a pretty bleak time, I have to say. And then a sufficient number of weird things happened to make me go, nah, there really is more going on in the world than the physicalism that we're told, the materialism that we're taught. So my agnosticism is more that I can't quite settle on what the picture is. I know that there is something more to the world, but I struggle to say what that is.
And so when you started that PhD, you were a practicing Druid,
Mm-hmm.
and you felt very connected to the Druid way of life.
Mm-hmm.
And by the end of that PhD, there was a disconnect from that.
Correct, yeah.
But life has woven you back into being a Druid?
Maybe, yes. I mean, I still call myself a Druid. Maybe I should tell you how I came to be a Druid.
Okay, great.
So I felt like I had a kind of bumpy transition into adulthood. I felt what I needed. So in my late 20s, I felt like I'm still not an adult. I'm still not there. What I need is a rite of passage. So I immediately knew what I needed to do. I needed to do something that would scare me deeply, because I was frightened of the dark when I was a kid, and as a teenager, really badly frightened of the dark. And I felt if I could just conquer my fear, if I could overcome my fear, that's what will propel me into being a proper adult. And I knew the thing that would terrify me the most, which was to spend a night by myself in West Kennet Longbarrow near Avebury. I know you do pilgrimages to Avebury, so you'll know West Kennet Longbarrow.
I wouldn't like to spend a night in that Longbarrow by myself.
No. I just knew immediately, oh God, that's what I've got to do. So I did a 3-day pilgrimage along the Ridgeway, and I completely overestimated how fit I was, and I was carrying loads of stuff. And by the time I arrived in Avebury, I had sciatica. I was knackered. I arrived at Avebury sort of wanting, trumpets and choirs of angels, and instead what happened was I collapsed down in a pile of very smelly, runny sheep shit. So I was covered in sheep shit. Limped to West Kennet Longbarrow, spent a night of just abject misery in there. There was no feeling of overcoming fear. There was just fear and dejection and misery. It was just horrific. And I crawled out feeling this big, and I thought, I need help. I can't do this on my own. And I joined OBOD, who I knew at the time were a teaching order, and they ran this correspondence course. And that's how I became a Druid. And it was, of course, through Druidry that I met Graham Harvey, who became my PhD supervisor, who invited me to do the PhD that would destroy my faith. And so you think, well, the gods really have got a sense of humour here, haven't they?
That they do.
And yet, if I'd not done that ritual, which I felt at the time was a complete failure, I wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation with you, because it set in motion a whole chain of events that led me back to academia. And as I say, even though I came out of that second PhD a reluctant atheist, I'd read that many theories of religion, Marx and Freud and Durkheim and, all these great thinkers, I found their arguments persuasive, but then weird things started happening, like really, truly weird coincidences. And I won't share them, because as soon as you share them, they don't sound weird to other people, but they come, when they happen, because they come with that feeling of the weird, that you're on the precipice of something, that something odd has really happened.
And by the weird and the odd, it's that sense of like divinity.
Yes.
Synchronicity.
Yes.
Intuition.
Exactly.
Like a magic.
Yes. And I like this word weird, this old Anglo-Saxon word weird, because there's something unknowable about the weird. It's just weird. We can only go so far in our knowledge, and then you hit the weird. And then we can't get any closer. So you know, in those moments of synchronicity, even though they're very difficult to convey to other people, you know them because it's not just a coincidence. It's freighted with meaning. The air bends, and so I'm not a member of any Druid order. I don't possess a white robe. I don't do any of the things that Druids do. Well, I do a few. But for me, maybe it's better to say that I practice Druidry. That for me, the figure of the Druid is a lure. It's something that is inspiring me and pulling me towards a way of being in the world that I was talking about with the bird song. The story I always come back to is the story that Tacitus, this Roman historian, tells about the destruction of the Druids in Britain in AD 60. And we have to assume that it's a true story and he wasn't making it up. But Suetonius Paulinus, the Roman governor, took his legions all the way to North Wales. It's a long way to North Wales at the best of times. And he marched them all the way to North Wales to take out the Druids, and he defeated them on Anglesey. And Tacitus says, they cut down their sacred groves and burnt them. Well, if the Druids were our wisdom keepers, if they did have that kind of knowledge, then me as someone who's of this land, that's the thing I can yearn for. That's the lure. And the one thing we know about the Druids is that they didn't write anything down. So that kind of knowledge has to be found outside of a book. And isn't that weird, an academic saying that? My life is surrounded by books. I buy books, I read books, I have piles of books in my life. But I know that the answer is not to be found in a book. It's found in that other kind of knowing, that whereby some part of me knows that a chiff-chaff has arrived, even though I'm not consciously paying attention to it. So in calling myself a Druid or saying that I practice Druidry, it's inspire me to find that knowledge again. And compared to Indigenous teachers I've known and met, my knowledge is like a child's knowledge, really. I like to think that my connection to the world is good, but really it's I'm an absolute beginner. But we had it here in these lands, and that knowledge is here for all of us, everyone in this land to find. We just need to listen to the rocks, the streams, the turning of the seasons. I mean, you know this, and your listeners know this. It's for all of us. It's there to be found. And I say that because I'm very mindful of appropriation and that hunger in us, that we can find it somewhere else, that someone else has it, and we can go to the Amazon and we can go to Mexico and we can go to Gabon or whatever. And yes, sure, of course, the teachers there have great riches for us, and yet it's problematic in this post-colonial, or hopefully post-colonial age. But
we're definitely not in a post-colonial
exactly.
age yet.
But the answer is beneath our feet.
Yeah.
It's in the land.
Yeah. Well, whatever land we find ourselves on.
Exactly.
And whatever lands we may also have come from, it's a complicated dynamic, isn't it? But I feel like there's always wisdom wherever we are, and there's wisdom that speaks through our bones, that comes from deeper ancestry, and wisdom that calls us from the future, and it's all there. And of course the books. But maybe some of the best things weren't written down.
Well, when you write something down, it's fixed. I think the world is all change. That's my hunch as to why the Druids didn't write anything down, because then there's a fixity to it. Whereas lore, Lore, is a living thing. It changes in the telling.
And in the experiencing of it, and then it might, even a ritual might be slightly different the next time because it's called for in a slightly different way. So being able to have that deep listening faculty open rather than following steps is part of living in that an animistic, fully alive breath. Thank you for sharing your story of your rite of passage. It's really moving. And it feels like what's missing from that story is the community that sent you off and received you on the other end. And that is what I feel so many of us are missing and longing for, especially in our spiritual and otherworldly travels, to have that sense of it being for the good of the community, not just for ourselves because we fancy it, but or we feel that we need it, but also a recognition that when we step into our courage to tap into deeper layers of wisdom and self-knowing and suffering and vision, that it has a place in our world.
Well, I completely agree. And of course, this is what I failed to understand about a rite of passage, is that it's not about transformation of the self, it's transformation of the community. So someone leaves to go out on a rite of passage and then they return to the community and the whole community is changed. Well, it has taken some book learning to realise that, but I think you're absolutely right that that's ultimately what we're all striving for, is that feeling of belonging in a community, and that we have a place in that community, and that our change, because we're always changing, not just at these sort of life crisis moments of, birth and death and what have you. We're always changing, but the hope is that change can be accommodated and witnessed and received by the community.
Yeah, welcomed and honoured and respected. Whereas often in modern life, it tends to feel problematic as people step into eldership. It's like, oh, now there's like illnesses to manage and care to organise, or when people step into adolescence, it's too wild. It's like, and so, yeah, that's definitely something that I feel collectively we are all craving and hopefully recreating. You're a father, so perhaps you're able to bring more of that in a community like this.
Well, yes. I mean, that's the hope of fatherhood. I guess my children are not yet at puberty, but it's coming soon, so I guess we'll find out. We'll reap what we've sown.
We'll check back in. Find out how they survived the Kennet Long Barrel.
So yeah, we'll see.
Thank you for tuning in. If you are enjoying this episode, do join our membership. For a small contribution, you can be part of our community, where we deepen the conversation and offer spaces of learning and embodiment. As a member, you are a patron supporting the making of this show, keeping the episodes full length, free and accessible for all. And you receive a number of benefits, such as monthly soul space, going deeper sessions, access to our library of workshops, and discounts on all our online and in-person experiences. Our membership is what makes us able to make this show and stay advertising free in a world that is always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. Head to allthatweare.org/membership to find out more and join today.
What are some interesting stories from your research around how psychedelics have been used in cultures of the past in order to really bring that information into the community in a way that it's honoured and revered and supportive of the future?
The problem we have in Britain, we have various medicine plants or medicine fungi, but no existing tradition of usage. And people imagine or they make inferences, but there's nothing definite. There's nothing that would satisfy my inner scholar. And so we can look to other cultures and we can look to what other cultures do, but they're always using other medicines, and the context is different. So I suppose, what's the culture with the unbroken tradition of using mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms? It's Mexico, it's the Mazatec, and yet their healing ceremonies are done in a very Christian context often, which is not something that necessarily sits well with contemporary Western sensibilities. So I'm sort of interested in tracking how people develop ceremony to hold psychedelic experience. And there's a number of ways it was done in the underground. The festival. The festival is a way of containing psychedelic experiences. Not always a good container, but it can be a good container. There's a lot that can go wrong at a festival. They're quite hectic places, not necessarily focused in the way we might think of a medicine ceremony. Some people go for walks in the countryside, and there are a number of people who use mushrooms in that way, that they go away from people, or as much as they can, somewhere off the beaten track, and they'll walk. They'll have a destination, the hill, the forest. But then people are starting to make what I think look more like medicine ceremonies. So if anyone who's traveled to the Amazon or drunk ayahuasca in those kind of settings, here we run into an interesting problem, which is that our local medicine is the liberty cap mushroom, and the Mazatec tell us that all the different mushroom species have different characters. The character of the liberty cap is tricksy. People describe it as a leprechaun or a pixie, or if you could personify the liberty cap as a human, it would be someone, frock coat, standing on one leg, playing a tipsy reel on a fiddle. And certainly a number of the ceremonies I've witnessed where people have been using liberty caps have all descended into chaos, complete chaos. And I don't know whether that's because we're just not very good at holding space, or whether it's the nature of the medicine that it brings out a playful, childlike, tricksy quality in us. And that is the medicine, that actually we need to learn how to play and laugh and become children again.
And enjoy chaos.
And enjoy chaos. Maybe the antithesis of that is something like a Native American church ceremony, where it's very contained and very sober in a way, where it's about the tradition and honouring the tradition. Whereas maybe what the medicine is giving us right now is just playfulness and laughter and merriment. So I'm intrigued to see how this develops. I know some people have been, some druids that I know have been creating mushroom ceremonies. The use of psychedelics within contemporary druidry is still seen as quite controversial. I think that's changing, but there was a lot of the leading figures in druidry are children of the 60s, and publicly, increasingly, they will talk about their own experiences with psychedelics in the 60s, but they saw a lot of casualties as well, and are mindful of the need for caution around medicine, and so emphasize other technologies of the self that don't require medicine, that are perhaps safer for a majority of people. And I think that's wise, and I think that's a cautious approach. But there are a few druids holding druidic mushroom ceremonies, and they tell me with great success. So it's an emerging field. It's something that's going to work by trial and error, and people will find formats that work and become inspired to bring in elements, and then we'll have something that in a few generations' time will be the container, will be the vessel.
It's interesting what you're saying about the 60s and that kind of time of peace and love, and how those people are now the elders and taking up that kind of space in the world. And And also we're at this time in many parts of the world where we're moving into a more fascist and not so peace and love time. I've heard you say before that from the research, it actually shows that people don't necessarily become more liberal just from taking psychedelics, and that's often a common misconception, that loads of people say, oh, wouldn't it be great just to put acid in the water? I'm like, oh, it would be horrible. Because of course, setting is so important, and also knowing what you're going into turns something into an initiation rather than a chaotic surprise. It reminds me that psychedelics can be used in any which way. I read that they were also used in the Mumbai terror attacks in order to allow the young men to go and kind of feel like they were in a video game, essentially, to create that severance from humanity and presence, so that they were able to do things that they might have found impossible to do. And we don't often talk about that side of, I mean, that's a very strong example, but it's often talked about that psychedelics are always kind of like this sort of doorway into this beautiful connection with nature and with the heart, and with like this sort of beautiful meeting of the divine in ourselves. And of course, that's not always the case. And I wonder if there's anything you can share from any of the research that you've done.
I've not really looked into that side of things, but I know the evidence is mixed, that there's some research that shows that after a dose of psilocybin, people are more open, they're more likely to express liberal views. That was one study. But as you say, there is also this right-wing psychedelia, and perhaps the safest way to think about psychedelics is as non-specific amplifiers, that they amplify what is in people. And if you're a flower child, they're going to amplify, your flower childness, your inner flower child. It's interesting, you were saying that the 60s generation are now in power. Well, it's the 60s generation, the boomers, that are also incredibly conservative and right-wing. And it was always my hope, as part of the psychedelic underground in the 80s and 90s, that, well, at some point, the hippies will be in power and then utopia will come in. And in fact, the opposite.
And they'll just start giving their land away.
It's terrifying what's happening in France and the Reform Party here, and Modi in India, and Trump, and on it goes. And so the idea that psychedelics are a magic pill that's going to solve the world's problems, I think it's a lovely idea, but I don't see evidence of that. Which brings us back to education, which is another reason why I'm in academia, is education. If you can challenge certainties and get people to realize that there's always another point of view, always, I think that's a good thing. And that, it's a lemniscate, psychedelic experience and education, they go together. So you've had this experience. Well, what other people have had that experience? How have they made sense of it? How have people challenged the way people make sense of it? Then we're moving away from the rigid certainties that become fascism, that desire for order and everyone to be the same. There'll always be another point of view, and that's refreshing, that's exciting. It's one of the things I love about folk music, is that we play this music over here, but oh look, you're playing that music over there, you do things differently. So can I come and join in? Or do you want to come and join in with us, and let's see if we can meet in the middle, have one of my tunes and let's swap tunes. It's beautiful. It's one of the images that come out of Druidry, is the figure of the bard. And the bard is someone who moves from hearth to hearth, carrying stories with them. It's the antithesis of fascism. It's someone who wants to cross boundaries and learn what's going on over there and in your fire. Wow, you play music like that. That sounds great. Let me join in. Sorry, I don't know where I'm going with this. I've rambled from your question.
That's okay. My questions are always just invitations for a ramble, knowing that we'll come back somewhere. I guess when you're sharing about the making sense of an experience and then kind of having the sense that you've made out of it challenged in order to kind of refine the sense that it makes, I hear that. And then I also feel like if I tried to do that with a mystical experience that I've had, there'd be nothing left of it.
Right.
And it would take away that power of whatever it has opened up in me. And of course, mystical experiences or initiations with plants, whether psychoactive or not, have a quality that can't be explained, or if one tries to put too many words to it, wouldn't be able to express what's happening or what it means.
And you're right. And I'm a great believer that there are some things that shouldn't be talked about, or should be talked about with a lot of circumspection and in the right context and with the right people at the right time, lest something precious lose its power. Other things, once they're spoken, I think once things are spoken, then they are already in that space where they can be questioned or talked about. So I'm certainly not saying this is what everyone should do. I'm talking about myself. I have certain things, certain truths that I hold on to, and then others that I will release into the world, and then they're to be questioned. For me, I suppose I always have the question in the back of my mind, what if I were mistaken? What if I were mistaken? Can I share an anecdote?
Please.
Many years ago now, I was stumbling around a field near Avebury at the summer solstice, seeing the world through bemushroomed eyes. A beautiful moment where night starts turning into day, and someone's just turned the colours up and it's still grey. And I saw maybe 50 yards in front of me a light dancing this way and that, like a will-o'-the-wisp. And I thought, it's a fairy. I can see a fairy dancing in front of me. There it is. It's a fairy dancing in front of me like this light just dancing backwards and forwards. And I turned round to see if anyone was around and could see it too. There was no one around. I looked back and the world did that kind of dolly pull like you see in the movies all the time, in horror movies. And I realised that light wasn't 50 yards in front of me. It was half a mile away. And what I was actually seeing was the headlights of cars on the A4 driving to work. And the distinct sense that I was the butt of a joke, that I was being laughed at. So did I see a fairy or did I see a car headlight? Well, I saw both. I know I saw a fairy, and I know it was comprised out of the lights of a car headlight. And, the skeptics will go, yeah, you were just mashed on mushrooms, you were deluding yourself. I think the truth is actually more interesting, both are true. They're not actually contradictory. That I did have a fairy encounter and I did see a car headlight, and for a moment they were the same. But there's a point of uncertainty that I can sit in, that I know both are true and maybe neither are true, but I know what I saw and maybe I didn't see it. Do you see where I'm going with this? That I don't ever want to delude myself into thinking that I've seen something that wasn't there. At the same time, there's a beautiful place of not knowing that for me is the kernel of my worldview. Is actually I can sit with the not knowing. I can hold it. I'm holding my cup of tea in front of me. There it is. At the center of things is this not knowing, and that's beautiful, actually.
And in that not knowing, perhaps there's also an acceptance that there are multiple layers and there is no knowing
Exactly.
of exact. You can't separate the different layers of reality.
Exactly. And how do we accommodate people who see the world differently? That's the challenge of our times. How do we accommodate that? It's particularly apparent in the study of religion in my discipline, that how can it be that humans over all the aeons that we've been have conceived religion in so many different ways? Are they all just wrong? That's what a materialist atheist would say. Are they all partially right? At the kernel of all these worldviews is the same mystery. And we get little flashes of it, little hints, little like scintillating flashes of light. We catch a glimpse, and that's all we ever can do. And we receive it in our cultural vessel, whatever that is, whether it's Druidry or Islam or an indigenous worldview, Christianity, it doesn't matter. And there's a limit to how close we can get to the mystery, but the mystery informs it all. And then if we know that, then I think there comes an acceptance of another point of view. That's how you see it. This is how I see it. And we're all looking at fairies, looking at car headlights. We've all got a glimpse of the truth, and it's partial. There's a humility. I think what I'm talking about is humility. It's just holding our beliefs lightly with humility, so that we can meet people who see the world differently. That's my aspiration. Whether I live up to it, that's another matter. That's for my critics to point out my flaws, right? We've all got our blind spots, but that's the aim, is to sit in humility with other people. And how's the world for you? How do you see the world? Yeah.
But even how are you experiencing this moment? There's so many different experiences of any one moment, of what each person sees, notices, feels, is experiencing in their own landscape. And we do come from a culture of like, this is the news, and there's 6 stories, this is the news today. And so we have been put into this sort of narrow, certain headline-esque way of experiencing the world culturally in the dominant culture. And so there is such work in the undoing of that kind of knowing, to always be aware that in most situations, especially interpersonal, we don't have very much of the story, in fact.
Yes, and I think you're right. And I think particularly it doesn't come so much from scientists, but it comes from science with a capital S. This whole culture that surrounds science, the way it's reported, the way comedians police the boundaries of the known. And we're sort of brought up with this idea that there is a singular truth in the world, and science will enable us to get there. It's a very sort of monotheistic view of the world. But what happens when you invert that and you say, actually, there's a mystery at the center of things, and all we can do is sort of get close to it, like putting our ears to the wall. We can catch little, because as you say, we know this from therapy, right? We have an idea of what was going on in that conversation, but our partners and beloved can have a completely different idea of what's going on in that conversation. So if we can't even get that straight, how can we get metaphysics straight, or our view of reality?
Yeah. It's very hard for 2 people to remember a conversation the same, even in that, let alone the feelings and the rest of the spectrum of it, but even just in like the what was said. It's no, well, I never said that. That is what you said. No, that's not what, and then you could get like stuck in that place.
Yeah. The joy of being human.
Yeah. I'm starting to feel the medicine of the foxgloves as we're in this conversation. As you mentioned, like leaning into the mystery, I kind of imagined the beautiful foxglove flowers and their invitation. I'm sitting here with you, having had this unusual experience, which also reveals the power of plants, of having touched a foxglove, which I do realize was was misguided. And I fell into a little bit of peer pressure and group mind and touched the stalk and leaves of a foxglove, and then found my body coming into a reaction due to the toxicity. And I've been trying to sit with the medicine of the heart, and it's still very much in process. But as you're talking about this space of uncertainty and humility, I can feel an opening. I can feel like that there's an experience within my own body mind that's loosening, that's like widening around what that experience of the heart is in the world and what's being invited in these times. And I don't recommend anyone to go and touch foxgloves, but there is always an invitation with all of the plants and the birdsong and everything to be open to learning and to experiencing ourselves differently, to being initiated and changed. And it doesn't have to be through a very deep, big, powerful psychedelic experience. That there is that invitation in the beauty of the moment to always allow a widening, a different perspective, a different understanding of who we are.
Yeah, beautifully put. Yes, and your foxglove experience is a reminder to be careful with with plants and medicines. They're powerful things, and as you say, a lot of the insights can come in a much more prosaic manner. The gentle practice of paying attention to the sounds around you, or you can go and look at a foxglove. You don't have to touch it. You can go and look at the flowers, which are exquisitely beautiful. They do, as the name suggests, invite you to put your fingers in the flowers, but do take care.
To jump in.
You know, they've got a presence, foxgloves.
Yeah.
They really do.
Would they also have a trickster nature similar to the liberty caps? And some call them the elven witch. Do
they? Okay.
Which does make me laugh, because I did ask the foxglove if I could and actually if I could take the flower for this as an offering for a ceremony. And the foxglove not only said yes, but gave me more of the plant. And then I was like, oh. So then I took the leaves as well, because it had given me them. And then here we are. And so there's both a kind of a remembrance to be really like respectful and to honor the potency, and to also know that they can be really playful and tricksy.
Yeah.
The foxglove didn't tell me not to wash my hands. That bit I did for myself.
Well, you have a story now about foxglove, and you can share that story, and that will become lore, Lore. That's exactly how it happens. That, you know, you've got two beautiful pieces of information about the foxglove, that it's an elven witch, and it can take you to A&E if you touch it.
And that it is a medicine of the heart.
It is a medicine, yeah.
Yeah, and these initiatory experiences are there with the dandelion. It doesn't have to be with the toxic, the really dangerous, the psychoactive.
Yes.
We can have these beautiful conversations, initiations, experiences.
Absolutely. There's a lot of glamour around psychedelics. You know, they're cool and sexy, but sometimes we just need to pay attention to the flowers growing in the pavement outside our house. And that ties back to what I was saying at the beginning about the beauty of the world, that the beauty is right there. It's growing outside our front doors. It doesn't require a hefty psychedelic experience to notice it, though that can help, has its place. But I'm a great believer in the everyday and I say the prosaic. There's nothing prosaic about a dandelion. It's one of the most exquisite flowers you can see. I mean, we call it a weed. I mean, what arrogance is that? I mean, look at it. It's just stunning.
This conversation has been powered by dandelion tea.
Yes, we're sitting here drinking dandelion tea. Yeah, there's a great power in this kind of practice of noticing, the world around us and paying heed. What a gift in this time when we've got so many distractions. We were talking about email, and we didn't even talk about social media and smartphones. But what happens when we put all that down and give our attention to the world, whether it's paying attention to birds or plants, then we're in dialogue with the world, and the world can speak, and we can listen. And often that communication is very subtle, it's very gentle. It's not an earth-shattering initiation, but it's nonetheless powerful. And you can start to build up relationships with plants and notice them. Yeah.
And there's something from the research of like the collection of other people's psychedelic experiences, or the stories, or even just me sharing this now about the foxgloves, that opens up like possibility for others in deeper connection to the modern human world, like allowing the rigidness of the mind to open up into recognizing that every species, every plant, like, is here and is not just here as decoration for the human experience.
One thing I've learned at my time at Schumacher, this is the case, right? That you can think you can come up with an impeccable argument. You know, you've published your paper in a peer-reviewed journal, this beautiful piece of work, it all makes sense, it's logical, it's coherent, it draws on work that's gone before. And someone who's cleverer than you will come along and go, yeah, but you didn't think about this. So all ideas, all arguments are fallible, they can all be tested. But when someone speaks from the heart and they tell a story about themselves and it's congruent, it's infallible. I can't deny it. That's how it is for you. There's a line in the sand there that I can't cross. I don't have to be persuaded by it, but I can't deny that's how it is for you. This is when we move away from law, LAW, which is the realm of the mind and argument and ideas that I love, you know, I'm an academic, and we stray into law, LORE, the stories that I can't deny that you had a powerful reaction to foxglove. You've told me the story, right? It's true. It's true for you.
Yeah, you can touch my forehead.
I can touch your forehead, your fevered brow.
I'm also, you know, feeling that as well as the heart opening, like, and the humility within that, there's also that shadow revelation where I've been churning through, and I think there's some more churning to go through, but seeing certain situations and seeing my role and creating them differently, and all of that part that allows one's heart to open and to recognize our flaws deeper. And there's something in the human-centered world where, you know, you have to be perfect and get it right, and that creates something that's very unhealthy, and like the certainty in the global political picture, that like certainty in ourselves as well, it creates such distortion. Being able to relate to the modern human world, I find, can be much more forgiving of the human flaws and much more welcoming of spaces and beings to come and be with, and to help hold and transmute and release and open up a deeper, more holistic, more forgiving way of being human.
Beautiful. How are you feeling post foxglove? Have you still got a headache?
I'd say I'm definitely in foxglove.
Yeah.
Still, yeah. It feels like there's a little bit further to go with this one. And I wasn't going to mention it. It's something about also not mentioning things until they're complete, but the foxglove was making her there. I think there's an androgynous nature of a foxglove that was making their presence known and wanting to offer an aliveness of plant consciousness into the field. Is there anything else that you feel like you would like to share that you've been ruminating, teaching, or researching of late?
if there's one thing, it's this, and I would say this because I'm a musician and a folk musician, but I think I'm a great believer in the metaphor of listening. Well, literally listening, but the metaphor of listening. I don't see a whole lot of listening going on these days, though obviously people are listening to this on your podcast. That's an act of listening. What do I mean by that? Well, I used to go busking. I used to do an awful lot of busking and never did particularly well at it. And I love busking. I'm a great believer in street performance, and I think it's magic and old, and it's another one of those old timeless things. And yet I hate the way busking has gone, in that now everybody uses amplification and you can hear people for miles away, and I generally feel a bit assaulted. And nobody listens, everybody walks past, even though you can now hear the music from blocks and blocks away. Nobody listens. Whereas before amplification, you might just hear the sound of a fiddle or an instrument being played, and it would draw you in, it would lure you in. And there's the metaphor that we're supremely bad at listening. Everybody is shouting and nobody's listening. And yet this beautiful thing that happens when you give your attention to someone or to the world, whether it's a bird song, or in your case, you've had no choice but to listen to the foxglove. You've been listening to foxglove, right? It's demanding. Here we are talking about foxglove because we're listening to foxglove. Something has emerged. It's been like the spine somewhere of this conversation, and we're just I'm running away with the metaphor now, but we're the flowers hanging off here. The power of listening. And I think we all know that the gaze is problematic, and anyone who's studied any kind of humanities will know about the male gaze. But I'm sure we've all had that experience of being stared at, and often, we turn around and someone is staring at us, and it's generally unwelcome, isn't it, that feeling? But there's something potentially hostile or intrusive about the gaze. The bird world know this as well. I my attention is always drawn by if a bird flies across my vision, and I'll look, and the moment where I see the bird, it will change direction because it perceives my look as a threat. But it's not the same when I'm listening. We can be active in our listening, but listening is always receptive. I like it as a metaphor for how to be with other people and how to be with the world. And of course, it's not always possible. Often our attention wanders, but when we are really able to listen to someone and give them that attention, something beautiful emerges in that space. When we give our attention to a flower, something emerges in that space. So that would be my metaphor, but it's not a metaphor. We literally listen. But yeah.
What is your call to action that you would like to leave us with?
I was lucky enough to meet a delegation of elders from the Yawanawa people in the Amazon. They are holding on to their language just. Their language was taken away from them by colonialism. The reason why they were here is that they're raising awareness and raising money for a school that they want to create in their home to teach their language and preserve their language. I think at one point there were, just a handful of people who could speak that language. My call to action is to support them in any way you can, and I'll share a link. Language is so important in all of this. I'm, absolutely classic in that I speak English, and I wasn't very good at languages, but there's no impetus when your language is the dominant language of the world. There's no impetus to learn another language. And yet the glimpses I've had from the smattering of other languages, that they reveal another window on the world. Language and culture and memory, they're all bound up together. So if we can do something to help a people who've been very oppressed by colonialism preserve their language, then that's a beautiful call to action.
Thank you. How would you like people to get in touch with you? We'll share it all in the show notes, but if you want to share your website so that people can hear it. And
I do have a blog, but it's dead. But people can get in touch with me that way. I'm on Instagram, The Bosky Man, and I'm sure I can be found through my various university websites, but by all means do get in touch if you've got questions or want to learn about what teaching I do within the academy. Big pleasure to hear from people.
Thank you.
And thank you. It's been an absolutely wonderful, generative, fascinating conversation, and I felt very listened to and very drawn out, so thank you. I've enjoyed it immensely.
Me too. Thank you so much, Andy, for sharing your wisdom with us.
Pleasure. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and it has sparked some inspiration and creativity in you. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on allthatweare.org. We give space to our guests to share their perspective without debating it or fact-checking, as this approach allows for deep, unedited conversations from the heart. We trust your discernment and wisdom to take what is useful and challenge what isn't in your own understanding. We offer spaces for discussion and integration in our membership community, which we would love for you to join. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible by you, our beautiful community. If you loved this and would like to connect more deeply with us, please join our membership. You choose what you contribute based on our sliding scale, and you become a patron whose support makes this podcast happen, as well as receiving access to a library of many resources and invitations to nourishing events. Please also hit subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen so others can find us. This podcast is made by an all-female global team. Me, Amisha Ghadiali, producer and host, Anna Greta Folderbach, who crafts the words that accompany each episode, and Mary Chan, who edits the sound so skillfully. All That We Are celebrates all that we are already and the untapped potential that lives inside us. It invites the full power of the more than human world, nature, the unseen, our ancestors and our future generations. It reminds us that we never exist in silo, through borders, timelines, or polarity, that in each and every moment, all that we are is here.